Hello all and welcome to this week 2 video review for the Agincourt 1415 Myth and Reality online course. I'm Alexander Lobanov, one of the online facilitators on the course, together with Mike Warner, who did the video session last week. It's a great pleasure to see so many people sharing their opinions in online discussions, sharing their finds across the internet from Agincourt600.com and other web resources, and also asking quite a lot of interesting and relevant questions. It's especially nice to see that so many people are still interested as the course is being run the third time. So by now we've done week 1. We saw Henry V setting his claim to the French throne and assembling his army, which is quite a massive organization effort, and also dealing with internal opposition at the Southampton plot. During the week 2, which saw the anniversary of the Battle of Agincourt, we were able to follow the footsteps of the English army from the siege of Harfleur on a dramatic march across Normandy and Picardy and to the Battle of Agincourt itself. And there were quite a lot of interesting questions asked. One of them, why didn't Henry V land at Calais? Why did he need to invade Normandy? Why he couldn't use the bridgehead in France he already had? And there may have been two considerations behind this. On the one hand, the control of Normandy seems to be of great importance to Henry V, as in the following years, 1417 to 1419, he undertook a massive invasion campaign in Normandy, and he tried to re-establish the Duchy of Normandy, and possibly it was his real goal in the war at this point, and not the throne of France to which he set up the claim. So possibly he was able to exchange the sovereignty over Normandy for abandoning his claim to the throne. The second consideration may lie in the political situation in France at the moment. In 1415, the partying power was the party of Armagnacs, and being the partying power meant being responsible for defending the kingdom. On the other hand, the Duke of Burgundy was quite disposed to being in peace or even an alliance with the English, because his county of Flanders was much dependent on the English wool, and therefore he was interested to maintain a measure of peace with the English. If Henry V landed at Calais, he will have no choice but to invade France with the Burgundian counties of Artois and Flanders, and this will most likely initiate a great armed conflict with the Duke of Burgundy. However, if he landed in Normandy, it was quite likely that the Duke of Burgundy would just step aside and let his political enemies, the Armagnacs, deal with the English invasion, and therefore Henry won't be facing the whole might of the French kingdom against him. And this is very much what actually happened, because the Duke of Burgundy took very little part in the Agincourt campaign. The most discussed matter during the week may have been the prisoners' massacre, and in my opinion there are some things to be kept in mind when discussing it. And so first of all, the measure of private engagement in the campaign on the English side, and how much the war was kind of private enterprise for the soldiers. It's maybe useful to step back to week 1 and consider the questions about why the archers who did all the job were paid less than the men-at-arms. And of course, to some degree it was a matter of social status and all that, but to some degree it was just a matter of that whoever invested more into the campaign was getting greater wages, because the men-at-arms needed an expensive set of armor, he needed several horses, he probably needed a servant to accompany him and help him get into his armor in a reasonable time, and therefore this may have been the reason behind his great wages. And if we think of the commanders, once again, Duke was paid much more, but he didn't come to the muster alone. He was always accompanied by a company of men at arms and archers amounting to several hundred men, and it was his responsibility to ensure that all of them were duly equipped and supplied, and so he was paid not only for his presence but also for managing his retinue, which he needed to have due to his status. Getting back to the prisoners, it's important that every prisoner taken was the property of his captor, and the king was expected to have a share, 1/3 of the ransom, but it was not his property. Therefore, killing the prisoners without a good reason would certainly deprive the soldiers of their profits, and it will be quite a significant reputation loss for the king to give such orders without a reason. Therefore, there might have been some misperception, and the French threat may have been considered greater than it actually was, but it's unlikely that it was done completely without a good reason. And actually, when we look at the Burgundian Chronicle of Enguerrand de Montrelet, he mentions an attack and the English baggage train by the French or Burgundian local knights such as Isambard d'Agincourt, and it is their fort whom the chronicle blames for the massacre of the prisoners. And it's interesting that this attack may have been part of French battle plan, because we know that it was intended to send a company of men-at-arms to attack the English from the rear, and if such an attempt was done, it would be most reasonable to place those men-at-arms under command of an experienced local noble like Isambard d'Agincourt. The last thing in relation to the battle, I was really surprised to see many interesting reports about the prisoners and about what can be considered and cannot be considered war crime. And probably the most interesting comment I came across was the idea that by modern day standards, even taking a prisoner for ransom would be considered war crime, and it certainly wasn't such in the 15th century, as you may find from the works of Remy Amble, who did a massive work on this, and he was able to discover at least over 300 prisoners taken at Agincourt, and you can see the lists based on the sources from England and France at the Agincourt 600 section of the medievalsoldier.org. The other question is how much the absence of the king may have affected the French morale during the Battle of Agincourt. On the one hand, it appears that the French were rather overconfident in their forces as the battle started, so probably not much effect on their morale. On the other hand, it's worth noting that after the capture of John the Good in 1356 at Poitiers, the French kings were not very keen to appear on the battlefield. The French recovery during the 1370s was done under Charles V, Charles the Wise, who never took the field himself. The military command was delegated to the king's brothers, such as the Dukes of Anjou, of Burgundy and Berry, and to commanders like Bertrand du Guesclin, and this proved enough to drive the English back, and therefore, although Charles VI did participate in some campaigns in person, it's worth asking whether it was really considered necessary for the king to lead the army in person by early 15th century in France. Okay, thank you for your questions, and it was really a great pleasure to see you this week, and I hope to see all of you next week during our week 3, where we'll be discussing how the battle was reported and perceived from the first days, from Henry V's triumph in London and to the commemorations of the 600th anniversary of the battle in 2015. So thank you very much for your attention, and see you.